Welcome to the 12 Days of Christmas. I'm glad you could join us. 12 Days of Christmas is where we're taking the various characters of the Christmas story and talking about them a little bit to prepare our hearts for Christmas. Now, it may seem odd as we near Christmas Eve to talk about the character I'm speaking of today, that is King Herod. But he is a vital part of this story because he introduces us to the world in which Christ was going to be born, a dangerous world. When we think of King Herod, he is referred to as King Herod the Great, and he's the ruling king in Jerusalem when the wise men journey there. Now remember, he is set up as the king, but Rome actually is the military force over all of Israel. Herod's got kind of a thing, an involvement with the emperor of Rome, and he knows them, and the Roman emperors typically didn't try to put their own governor in. They tried to find a guy who was kind of ruling already in a nation when they overtook that nation and kind of propped him up a little bit. And that's King Herod's situation. Now, he's called King Herod the Great because he was the firstborn son of his father. But when I think of Herod the Great, I remember two things that he was great at. One, he was great at building, and the other, sadly, he was great at his cruelty. Now, he did certain things in the building aspect, like he engaged in what we know as Herod's temple. He rehabbed the temple in Jerusalem, and that would be a place where Jesus would do much of his ministry from as he would grow. But he also, Herod the Great, actually created what we know as the marina area of Caesarea, and he fortified Herodium and that place called Masada, you may remember. But he's also marked by his great cruelty. In fact, historian Paul Meyer reflects on this. Basically, Meyer says that many of Herod's problems were back home because he'd married 10 wives. He had 10 wives, and of those wives, he had 15 princes, or 15 young men who would replace him as king at some point. And each of those male princes was scheming to succeed to be number one. But remember, there can only be one number one. And so Meyer says if there weren't 2 or 3 plots taking place before they had their orange juice in the morning, you knew something was wrong. Josephus, the historian, gives us just a hideous tale of what was going on in the family. There were attempted poisonings, one brother against another. In fact, it so rattled Herod that he actually put to death 3 of his own sons just on the suspicion of treason. And he put to death his favorite wife out of the 10 of them. Miriam was his favorite. She was a Maccabean princess, and he put her to death and then killed his mother-in-law. In fact, he killed more than one mother-in-law. In fact, it's said that Augustus, remember Caesar Augustus himself, said of Herod, I would rather be Herod's pig than his son. And Augustus does a thing there with a double pun. It's the Greek word koiros and hurios. It's a little twist on the words. And the idea is that at least pigs weren't slaughtered in Israel, but Herod's sons were. This is what we see as the first open threat to Jesus, even as a toddler. Now listen to the text as we read it together. Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose, and have come to worship him. And when Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And assembling all the chief priests and the scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. And they told him, In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written by the prophet, And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Then, verse 7, Herod summoned the wise men secretly and ascertained from them what time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word that I too may come worship him. Now we know from later in the text that Herod's intention was never to worship, but it was to execute. He looked to take out, if he's not afraid to take out his own sons, then he isn't going to be afraid to take out the rumor of a king being born in Israel. Now, you may wonder why we look at Herod so closely at Christmas, and I have a couple of reasons. It's easy for us to think of Christmas with all of its warmth and beauty as a secure place, but that first Christmas for Jesus was anything but that. He was born into the most dangerous of circumstances. From the first year of his life, he's on the run. He runs to his father and mother, take him to Egypt. Then they want to come back and go back to where they were used to being, and instead they have to take him up to Nazareth. They're on the run, and Herod becomes the backdrop of how an earthly king rules compared to Jesus, who's the backdrop of how a divine king rules. Herod killed his own sons to protect himself, but God the Father gave his own son to protect the likes of peasants like you and me. Herod ruled with cruelty, but Jesus would rule with compassion. It is said that when Jesus saw the masses, he had compassion on them. And Herod's rule was short, wasn't it? Just 30 to 30 some years. But Jesus is the King of Kings who will reign forever and ever. So when we think of the Christmas story, we realize that Jesus was born into some of the most dangerous of circumstances, and that when we compare him to King Herod, we see what a real king is like and what a false man-made king is like.